All right, good afternoon. So we are proud to be hosting an important conversation with the Muslim Council of Britain as part of the Green Party conference. Islamophobia is real. The lives of Muslims and those perceived to be Muslim are impacted by it adversely in many ways. As many in positions of authority and influence have been propagators of Islamophobia, instead of helping in the fight to eradicate it, it is up to Muslims and our allies to work together collectively to tackle this long-standing and pervasive racism. Part of this fight is helping to address the reservations of those who in good faith have concerns about the definition of Islamophobia, a definition that has been widely endorsed across Muslim communities, most political parties and many sections of civil society. In this session, we shall discuss what constitutes Islamophobia, how this type of racism actually manifests in terms of everyday lived experiences, how pervasive Islamophobia is in British society, and how we can work together to tackle Islamophobia effectively. Today's speakers are Miqdad Versi, spokesperson and head of public affairs of the Muslim Council of Britain, Tabitha Bhatti, public affairs officer of the Muslim Council of Britain, and myself, Maroof Raouf, from the Greens of Colour. Miqdad.
Okay, thank you very much for introducing me. And right now, we're going to be showing you a few slides to explain the real challenges of Islamophobia and the purpose of today's session, which Maroof has quite smartly and carefully outlined. If you go to the next slide, what we want to do today is talk about this specific definition. This is the APPG British Muslim definition, which is Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. Now, there are lots of reasons why this definition was chosen. Firstly, what's the point of choosing a definition of Islamophobia? Part of the reason you want to choose a definition and have a definition is so that it's clear. Many people historically have tried to make this claim that Islamophobia is all about shutting down debate about Islam. And Muslims don't think that. Of course, Muslims are the ones who should define the racism that they face, but it's not been the case that Muslims are saying, we think that Islamophobia needs Islam to be protected. In fact, our own, the holy book of Muslims, the Quran talks very clearly about how God will protect Islam and God will protect the Quran. And it doesn't need a definition to protect our faith. What we want to do is people to feel very comfortable with critiquing and different aspects of Islam so they can then learn about it better. What we wanted to make sure, however, is that therefore there is a definition that makes it clear what Islamophobia really is. And therefore it is not something where it is a critique of ideas, but it's rooted in racism. And Islamophobia is a specific type of racism. Right now, all of us know what racism is in all of its various manifestations, and we'll talk about that in a second. But we know what anti-black racism is. It's a very clear thing. Everyone's aware of what anti-black racism is. It sometimes can manifest itself in terms of how people speak to one another, in terms of the words. It can manifest itself in terms of hate crime, in terms of people punching one another up, or hitting, or it can manifest itself in terms of a structural issue, whether it's to do with prejudice, whether it's to do with the way media reports about something, whether it's to do with the fact that, black people are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. These are all different manifestations of racism. Islamophobia is no different. The only difference is it's a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslim identity or perceived Muslim identity. And Muslim identity is Muslimness, right? So, for example, by expressions of Muslim identity, well, it's not just about a Muslim individual. It could be a cemetery, it could be a mosque, it could be the Quran, it could be lots of things. If someone decides to burn a book and chooses to burn the Quran and does so in a way but by the far right, that can be an expression of Muslim identity which is being targeted in that way. And the reason why we use perceived Muslimness here is that one of the first people to have got a hate crime against them after 9/11 was a Sikh Muslim, because people thought he was a Muslim. And Sikh individuals across the country, people across the country have faced Islamophobia because people think they're targeting them because they think they're Muslim, but they're not. And so that's where this definition comes from. It's quite a simple definition in the sense of it's a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslim identity, Muslimness, or perceived Muslims. It's a one-liner, simple, and basically the only thing it's trying to identify is it's a type of racism. And the key thing is it's a slightly different type of racism because it's not just targeting black people, for example, or brown people, but it's targeting expressions of Muslim identity or perceived Muslim identity or Muslimness. So that's it in a nutshell. But I think the reason why we do this is that we can then, when we have this in place, we can then talk about how it manifests itself. So the next few slides we'll start talking about that. So if you go to the next slide, so this is what I was talking about before. You've got negative social attitudes, you've got structural discrimination, you've got verbal and physical threats or aggression, and you've got hate crime. All of these are different types of racism. You'll see them if instead the target was black community or Asians or Southeast Asians or whatever grouping you want to do, the same thing except the target is expressions of Muslim identity instead. And let's go to the next slide and we'll talk about each one of these in turn. So social attitudes, I don't know how many of you will be aware of the reality and the scale of Islamophobia, but 31% of young children think that Muslims are taking over England. Like, where do these attitudes come from? 31% of young children think that Muslims are taking over. This is a conspiracy theory. I mean, Muslims are about 4% of the population, 4 to 5%. How are Muslims taking over the country? And we'll come into later, if you look at the socioeconomic status of Muslims, there's no way that's even remotely possible. So that's just not true. It's a false statement. It's been propagated by those who have these conspiracy theories about Muslims. It's a type of racism because what they're trying to do is they're trying to create hate against Muslims by this narrative that has then infected young children, because young children then believe this stuff. 56% think Islam, not fundamentalist groups, poses a threat to Western liberal democracy. 32% believe there are no-go areas in Britain where Sharia law dominates and non-Muslims can't enter. And 18%, now this is one of the worst ones, 18% believe that Muslim immigration to this country is part of a bigger plan to make Muslims a majority of this country's population. So these are real, some of these are real conspiracy theories. And these conspiracy theories that have gained traction, they've gained traction because there is this idea that Muslims, and be very clear, that Muslims are a problem. And Muslims aren't a problem. They're like everybody else in society and shouldn't be thought of in that negative way. And therefore, this is a type of racism because it generalizes, it treats the group as a homogenous group, and it doesn't understand that actually Muslims are different and Muslims have different views and shouldn't be thought of in this way and shouldn't be thought of as a group that's trying to take over the country, because it's just not true. These Sharia laws, no-go zones, this is an example of something that was created by one of those think tank people who actually, newspapers still cite, even though these guys are conspiratorial nut jobs who make up stuff about Muslims all the time. Still, these are the guys, these are the types of things that happen and that are talked about when it comes to Muslims. If you go to the next slide. And obviously the key point here is, like all racism is structural. It's not just the fact that people have these views. It's the fact that these views are therefore embedded in society and create disparities between different groups, Muslims being one of them. And therefore, when Muslims, if you look in society and you see that Muslims, half of Muslim households are considered to be in poverty compared to 20% of the overall population. If Muslims just living in society, just if you happen to have a name like Muhammad, that's an example of someone's Muslim identity, and they are. And if you just happen to have the name Muhammad, you have to pay more for your car insurance. If you happen to be a British Muslim woman, then you're 71% more likely to be unemployed. It's easier to get a job if your name is not Muhammad. I mean, these are examples of in society whether it's to get a job, whether it's to go to university, whether it's to buy car insurance. There's other stats about if you want to get a flat, or if you look at socioeconomic status, or if you look at criminal justice system. If you look at any of these areas, Muslims are disproportionately impacted and dangerously so. That's an example of structural racism, structural discrimination, and this is therefore one of the biggest manifestations of Islamophobia in society. And that's why it's really important to recognize when we talk about racism, this is the type of racism. It's just Muslims are the victims. If you go to the next slide. And the reality is that this really manifests itself in the media. and the media is one of the key elements of structural discrimination, right? When you talk about structural issues, you talk about the public space. You have media, you have politics, and you have all the hosts of how civil society in public space operates. If you talk about the public space, when it comes to media and politics, it's very similar. You have people called Rod Liddell. I mean, there's hundreds of articles that, hundreds is unfair, but many articles that he's written where he talks about Muslim savages. He's talked about how he wants to blow up a bomb in Tower Hamlets because there's a majority Muslim population. He's talked about how you should try and disenfranchise Muslims so that they don't vote. Let's make sure that the day of voting is on a day when Muslims won't turn out to vote. It's vile, the type of nonsense that he comes up with, and it's not out there. Look at the sun on the bottom left, this cutout in key guide. Here's what terrorists look like. It's not what they do, what they think, but it's what they look like. So if someone has a headscarf on the left, if someone has a turban, if someone looks in any way brown, these are people of how terrorists look like. That is racism 101. Very simple, very clear. They are playing to this very dangerous narrative. 1 in 5 Brit Muslims have sympathy with jihadis. Other than the fact it's just false, look at the type of things they're trying to get people to think about Muslims. It's not about all, because obviously 1 in 5 Brit Muslims don't have sympathy with jihadis, but why are they trying to get this idea? It's a racism. It's the exact same thing as you see with any other type of generalization. This is a generalization about Muslims. Muslims silent on terror? No, Muslims aren't silent on terror. It's not true. This whole concept, which is used in the front pages of national newspapers and in major positions, this is what happens when it comes to Muslims. And there's, the MCB has a Center for Media Monitoring which looks at this stuff, and you see how when it comes to terrorism and compare a terrorist attack versus a terrorist attack which happens to be perpetrated by someone who's not a Muslim, and it's 9 times worse, 9 times more articles, 9 times more frequent usage when it comes to a terrorist attack which is perpetrated by Muslims. That's how bad it is. It's terminology that's used to try and stoke up this hatred, and that's what's there in the media, and it's public, and it's obvious, and it's well resourced. And there's lots of evidence on each of these different areas. If you go to the next slide. So we talked a little bit about Islamophobia in terms of the structural side of things, the media being one side. The other part of the public space is not just civil society that we've talked about already and media, but politics. And if you look at the Conservative Party, for example, and this is where it resides in particular, 47% think that Islam is generally a threat to the British way of life. 57% have a negative attitude towards Muslims, not just bad Muslims or certain types of Muslims or people who have different values, but Muslims as a generalized group. 21% have a very negative attitude. 66%, sorry, someone said that they've lost audio. Can you still hear me? Anyone else able to chat or let me know? Can you hear me? Okay, great. So 2/3 of Conservative Party members voted for the current PM. These are Conservative Party members, and therefore they voted for the current Prime Minister. 66%, that's 2/3 of Conservative Party members, believes a conspiracy theory that there are no-go areas in Britain where Sharia law dominates and non-Muslims can't enter. 2/3 believes this conspiracy theory. So just imagine how pervasive this Islamophobia is. I mean, some of the types of things that their party members in the Conservative Party have said are, they Muslims are outbreeding us, and within 30 years, this will be a Muslim-led country with Sharia laws. I mean, there's no evidence for this stuff. Why are these types of narratives and conspiracy theories taking hold within the Conservative Party? It is a serious problem. And this is one of the arguments and the challenges of structural issues that impact and then feed down. And if you go to the next slide, so we've talked very much about how their social attitudes. We've talked about how it's embedded within structures in society, whether that's in the civil society, whether it's in media, or whether it's in politics. And now this is how it manifests itself in terms of verbal and physical violence. And there's so many examples. We've talked about, obviously, the terrorist attack outside Finsbury Park and near the mosque there, where someone was killed, and many more people could have been killed. There have been many other terrorist attacks which have been foiled. There have been many examples and reports about how many terrorist attacks could have happened on Muslims and that haven't. You have so many examples of Muslim women who have faced Islamophobia in different ways. For example, their veil being ripped off while someone's shouting, "You effing stupid Muslim." A man tried to kill a Muslim woman and their 12-year-old girl because they thought that Muslims are all responsible for terrorist attacks. Someone tried to use a power drill on someone else's kneecaps and feet and screamed at that convert, "We don't like Muslims over here, you know, I effing hate them." There is no way that anyone can argue that any of these things are anything other than targeting Muslims for being Muslim. That's a type of racism. It's nothing else other than the type of racism that's targeting their Muslim identity. They're not targeting anything else other than their Muslim identity and how they've expressed that Muslim identity. And their perception of it. It doesn't matter what this person thinks. It doesn't matter what this person believes. This person has been attacked because they're Muslim. And this is really, really important. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that the stats on this are very clear. You know, basically half of religious hate crime targeted Muslims. Okay, for example, so that's 47%. There's about 18% of religious hate crime which targeted Jewish people. So about 47% targeted Muslims. And when you try and understand this, think about the proportion of Muslims in this country, which is between 4 and 5%, depending on which stats you use. And 47%, nearly 50% of hate crime, religious hate crime, is targeting Muslims. See that disproportionality. And it looks like it's getting worse. Everything falls in that direction. If you go to the next slide. So what we come to is this idea that we need to try and define what is this thing that is impacting all these all Muslims in terms of its structural Islamophobia, the social attitude, the fact that it manifests itself in hate crime and prejudice in different ways. How do you define it, and why do you need to? You need to define it because then it makes it very clear what is and what isn't. And this Islamophobia definition makes that very clear because it doesn't talk about Islam. It talks very clearly about the fact that it's actually a type of racism, and therefore it's targeting expressions of Muslim identity or perceived Muslim identity, and therefore it's very different to this idea that you can't critique Islam. You also need to try and distinguish it from other types of racism, right? Or other types of discrimination. So for example, if you're a Muslim woman, you may face Islamophobia on the one hand because of your Muslim identity, because of your Muslimness. You may also suffer from sex discrimination or gender discrimination in some way because of misogyny. But that might be because of your being a woman. Or it could be that as a Muslim woman, you face both of those together, and it's intersectionality, and you face both Islamophobia and misogyny. Similarly, a black Muslim man, for example, could suffer from Islamophobia because that person is a Muslim, because of what they wear, because of what their name is, because of what someone perceives them to be in some way, because someone thinks that they're Muslim. Or they could face racism as a black man, and that could be the reason why they face that racism. Or it could be because they're a black Muslim and therefore they face both, and therefore that's an intersectional concern. But the key point is, if it is because of their Muslimness, if it is because of their Muslim identity rather than their blackness, rather than them being a woman or any other issue, if it's because of their Muslimness, then Islamophobia is part of the reason. And that's why this definition comes about. That's what it matters. And because these things are real, Muslims face this on a daily basis, as all of the statistics show, as we see in the structural issues that are faced in the media and politics and in getting a job, in getting a flat, in getting car insurance, and going to school. Because of the manifestation of Islamophobia so broadly, we need to have a clear definition. Even if the government doesn't want to go down that path because it itself and its party and the Conservative Party are embroiled in this, we need to, as civil society, as Muslim communities, as allies within society, recognize this, adopt this definition, and work within society to ensure that this definition is therefore part of society and civil society and embedded, and then we can move on to the next stages. So that's if you like an overview. I'm going to hand over to Tabitha, who can then talk about some of the critiques of the definition that have come out and what the responses to those are, and hopefully that can help those who have some of the concerns, and we can go to a Q&A afterwards. Tabitha?
Hello. Can everyone hear me? Yep. All good? Okay, so thank you so much, Miqdad, for that overview. And I'm acutely aware of the fact that plenary overran. So we've had people join us a little bit later than anticipated. We will have a Q&A where we will revisit some of the key points that Miqdad raised. So there will be a recap, not to worry. I'm going to address some of the criticisms that have been leveled against the APPG on British Muslims definition of Islamophobia that that Miqdad so helpfully went through just then. First and foremost, the very term Islamophobia has borne the brunt of a lot of contention. This isn't something that has come about recently. This isn't something that has been coined by the APPG on British Muslims. This as a term has existed within our vernacular for many decades. In fact, within the English-speaking world, it is something that has been referenced as far back as the 1980s, certainly within academic discourse then. Insofar as its mainstreaming, it was the seminal Runnymede report that actually used the term back in 1997, and insofar as the definition of Islamophobia being rooted within racism, and Islamophobia being a form of anti-Muslim racism, that very concept is something that came into mainstream parlance in 2017, when it was again made when it was mainstreamed by another Runnymede report that coined that particular part of this definition. The definition itself was the result of a long process of consultation across communities by the APPG on British Muslims. It centered the opinion and the understanding of a range of experts and from a wide perspective of views. And so it is the result of that process of consultation, certainly making it something that that is quite unique in that sense. Since then, there hasn't been much of an effort to engage with Muslim communities on this issue. There hasn't been much of an effort to better understanding in a mainstream discourse insofar as governmental level is concerned. So as a definition, as a standalone definition, it does, since its inception, since its release in 2018, it has gone on to become the most widespread in terms of how well it's recognized, and indeed how much it has been endorsed. This is something that every major party now has endorsed, inclusive of the Scottish Conservatives, and is something that perhaps we would be willing or wanting to engage the Green Party in sort of, really having necessary conversations so we can take it towards that with the Green Party as well. Looking at specifics, the very concept of Islam isn't a race, and therefore Islamophobia cannot be a form of racism. I think that's been quite adequately addressed by Miqdad prior. This very critique discounts the fact that race or racism as a concept is far more intricate than perhaps we would give it credit for. This is a chameleonic construct that has changed and evolved over the course of history, affecting many different groups. And instead of it just being a case of these are a set of physical characteristics pertaining to a particular group of people, it's beyond that. It's better understood as a socio-cultural phenomenon. So culture, geography, history all influence to define what racism is at any given point in time. A group of people that has been racialized, and this is another key concept in the understanding of this definition, and indeed racism, and how Islamophobia is a form of anti-Muslim racism, are of course Jewish people who have been equally racialized in that manner, whereby a group of people are conferred with a certain set of characteristics that are deemed as innate to each and every one of those people. This is again something, this process of racialization is something that Miqdad has touched upon. It isn't just a person who happens to be Muslim that has committed a crime. That crime is now, and that individual is now representative of all Muslims. So as a group, Muslims being racialized, I think it's necessary to understand racism as a socio-cultural phenomenon and the process of racialization to actually be able to understand where this definition then comes from. These are key concepts, and this is something, of course, that we want to go into more detail into during the Q&A. Muslimness as a term, this is again, that's something that's been touched upon prior. What are we talking about when we say Muslimness? Is it just a vagary, an intended vagary? We're talking about markers of Muslim identity, quite simply put, just like blackness, just like Jewishness. These are markers of identity. They don't need to be something on someone's person. They can be extensions of Muslim practice, the practice of the Islamic faith. Again, as Miqdad mentioned, be it our religious text, the Quran, and transgressions against that, be it cemeteries, be it mosques, be it the manner in which you dress, be it the manner in which you speak in terms of how you're greeting. All of these facets come together to make up Muslimness. That's simply what we're referring to. Markers of Muslim identity. So no, this isn't an intentional vagary that's been included within the definition. An assault on free speech. If indeed you have this definition, then automatically there will be any kind of discussion pertaining to Islam as a faith, and the theology in and of itself is completely shut down. You're not allowed to criticize anyone. It's PC gone mad. Again, upon its inception, this was something that was documented within the APPG on British Muslims Islamophobia defined report that saw the launch of the Islamophobia definition. The intention was never to contravene upon free speech. The concept of the tenets of free speech, and indeed the ability to practice religion, are something that are innate to the British way of life, or so it's purported to be. It was never a case of shutting down conversation and constructive conversation that is had in good faith over the tenets of a faith. This has nothing to do with discussions pertaining to Islam, theological discussions. This is very much a means of identifying a type of racism so that we can then seek to address it thereafter. Context is very important. If indeed you have the likes of someone like, a far-right figure who's quite well known, drawing upon, inflammatory tropes and pushing these conspiracy theories or a conspiracy theory, and then linking it to the practice of an element of practice of Muslim faith, then of course that is going to be Islamophobic, and that should be challenged. There are limitations insofar as what you can say, and if indeed you've said it, there will be consequences. If indeed, for example, there's a discussion between individuals where you're breaking down aspects of theology, is that then Islamophobic? If there is that exchange happening and it is constructive and it's being held in good faith? No, of course not. So context is very necessary. Isn't legally compatible. I think this was quite central to the government's rejection of this particular definition of Islamophobia, in why they wouldn't be adopting it. It isn't compatible with pre-existing legal frameworks, particularly the Equality Act 2010. Now, the assertion that it needs to be compatible with the Equality Act in and of itself is quite reductionist in nature. It doesn't need to be an either or. And this is a fundamental concept that we should recognize. It doesn't need to be a case of either you have the Equality Act or you have the Islamophobia definition by the APPG. It doesn't need to be a case of, well, you have to then make amendments to the Equality Act in order to accommodate for it. Both can exist together. There will be overlap. There will be actions of Islamophobia. There will be manifestations of Islamophobia that can be addressed through the court of law and through legal, and there will be legal recourse for them, whereby legal frameworks can be applied and prosecutions can happen. And there will be elements of Islamophobia or Islamophobic manifestations that cannot be addressed by the Equality Act. That is understood, and it's something, and it is a concept that should be understood more widely, right? So when it comes to structural manifestations of Islamophobia, that have been touched upon prior, be it the disproportionate rate at which Muslim households are in poverty, for example. How do you prosecute that? It's very difficult. When it comes to instances where there potentially is discrimination at play, it's notoriously difficult to prosecute. And so both concepts, they need to exist together. It isn't an either nor. Again, this is something that we can discuss in more detail if indeed there's anyone that's interested in the Equality Act, what it covers, and how it can interlink and sort of work alongside the Islamophobia definition, and would present an obstacle for security services. There was the assertion initially that the having of this definition, a definition for Islamophobia, would then impede upon the security services' ability to actually engage with Muslim communities and prevent potential, acts of violence or terrorism. This in and of itself is quite a fantastical assertion. There is an element of prejudice within it, because the implication there is that, well, if we can't engage with Muslim communities and we can't police them adequately, it might then result in there being a breach of national security. So that is quite a sinister implication then and there. But what's quite important here is that as a criticism, this is sort of dead in the water. Initially, upon its release, you did have some high-ranking police officials come out and make this assertion, in step with some rather right-wing think tanks who had floated the idea initially. After a process of consultation with the APPG itself and indeed parliamentarians, within 2 or 3 months, you had a reversal of that opinion. So as and when they looked into the matter, and this includes the senior-most police officer who deals with counter-terrorism in the country, Neil Basu, he himself then came on record to say that actually it wouldn't really impede our works. Upon, you know, sort of understanding the matter, upon doing my research, upon having necessary dialogue with, you know, concerned parliamentarians, I'm confident that we can continue doing our work. So you have a senior most police official saying, actually, no, it won't really impede the work of the security services. So this is a slight overview of the criticisms faced and a brief sort of exposition pertaining to why each of them really can be addressed. I think there is never going to be an absolutely correct and entirely sort of adequate definition. Not everyone is going to be able to agree with something across the board in its entirety. But this particular definition, when it comes to the APPG on British Muslims definition of Islamophobia, continues to be the most widely recognized and indeed endorsed. This is something that we have to run with. This is something that we have to work with and push forth so that it sort of enters mainstream consciousness. Once we know what Islamophobia is, just in terms of general discourse from the mainstream, we can then set about actually challenging it effectively across civil society. I'm just going to hand over to Maroof now, who will touch upon the Green Movement and how we can sort of get involved and work together to make this happen.
Hello, good afternoon to all attending, and I hope you can hear me. So my name is Maroof, and I am a member of the Greens of Colour. The Greens of Colour is a liberation group within the Green Party in England and Wales that supports and amplifies the voices and experiences of African, Caribbean, Asian, Latino, Indigenous and marginalised ethnic groups within our country. As a committee, we also see it as our responsibility to have people with disabilities, long-term health conditions, elders, LGBTQ+, young Greens and those of different faiths in the room when we make decisions. What I mean. We are doing this session today to encourage members and supporters to have the discussion about racism and Islamophobia specifically, and how awareness of it can help us to be more inclusive and not make racial slurs. Green Party members and supporters may have ideas about Islam and Muslims that they have got from the media. These may be incorrect. These may not be popular views. These may not even be accepted ideas. However, members and supporters need to have open and honest conversations with their fellow members about Islam, especially the Muslim members of the party, which I feel we have so few of. How can we as a Green Party challenge Islamophobia if we do not know anything about Islam or Muslims, and that our view only comes from third-party sources? How can we challenge Islamophobic traits if we don't even know if something is an Islamophobic trait? As members and supporters of the Green Party, we need to openly challenge those who make Islamophobic statements, whether that be our own members, whether that be our family, whether that be our friends, or whether that even be our leaders. We need to know what Islamophobic statements are. We need to openly talk about Islamophobia and how to challenge it. And we need to ensure that we, as a party, embed the APPG definition of Islamophobia that Miqdad has quite eloquently talked about earlier on. And we need to do this at a grassroots level. We need to do it from the start, when members first join, when supporters first support us. We want more diverse groups to see the Green Party as an organisation that speaks out against all forms of racism and discrimination, especially Islamophobia. This can be done. This can be done if we start today. If all you do after this fringe today is to go online and find out about the APPG definition, then that is a good start. I encourage you to do that. After this fringe finishes, I encourage you to go online, have a look at the APPG definition, read through it, try and understand it, and then ask questions. Make sure you ask questions. Thank you. I'll hand back now to Tabitha.
Thank you for that, Maroof. We're certainly excited to be here today at Green Party Conference. We're excited to have this conversation with Green Party members. I'm just going to pick up on where Maroof left off and talk about next steps, tangible things that we can do going forth. Just in the chat now, I've dropped a sort of a set of key resources to get everyone started in this process of sort of educating ourselves to the facts of the matter, getting our heads around the APPG definition. It's some pretty hardcore reading, but it's hugely insightful, and I would very much recommend that you have a look at those links in the chat. I'm just going to share my screen now. Yet again, do let me know if this is visible to everyone. Excellent. Okay, so I am going to look at, we're just going to touch upon next steps. So the first thing that we have to take into consideration is this process of education, right? You can't really do much if you don't know that an issue exists. So educate. What is Islamophobia? How pervasive is it? What impact is it having on Muslim communities? These are necessary conversations. We've started this process today insofar as engaging with the Green movement. And this has to very much mushroom. This has to grow from here. Organize our networks and our communities around this process of education. So of course we do have a robust Green movement in the UK. This is something that Green Party infrastructure that can be sort of activated and engaged to effectively then deliver this process of education. And advocacy is key at this point in time. As allies, if indeed you are non-Muslim, standing with Muslims and Muslim communities, starting with the Greens of Colour, for example, again, so eloquently put by Maroof. This process of embedding the APPG definition at council level, for example. There's Green councils up and down the country. It's entirely possible to pass motions the next time your council meets for the adoption of this definition. We know what it is, and now we're going to set about actually addressing it thereafter. And this is our benchmark. This is where we're starting from, the APPG definition of Islamophobia. That extends to the party itself. The Green Party technically hasn't officially endorsed the definition. This is something that an entire conversation needs to happen around within the party. When will this happen? I do believe it's only the Greens and the Conservatives, well, not even the Scottish Conservatives. The Scottish Conservatives have adopted it. So how do we address this? Is this something we want to address? Is this a definition we want to adopt? Is this something that we want to prescribe to and endorse alongside every other major party? That's a necessary conversation at council level, at national level. The party needs to engage and have dialogue around the matter. Another key vein of advocacy is Islamophobia Awareness Month. That is just around the corner in November. Support Muslim-led campaigns and organisations, and there's going to be a flurry of activity pertaining to this. The MCB is going to be having a series of interventions in this vein, and you're very much welcome to get in touch with us, and we can take it forth. We can provide support if indeed the embedding at a council level is something you're interested in making happen. And we'll very much be able to work with you and work alongside Green Party activists to make that happen. And support the Centre for Media Monitoring. That is another MCB project, quite unique in that it sort of challenges Islamophobic discourse within the media specifically. It analyses broadcast and print output and identifies Islamophobic discourse as and when it's manifesting and where it's manifesting from, the extent to which it's actually projecting, and who the main culprits are. So their work is crucial in challenging Islamophobia in the media. It's another way you can get involved, support their work, grow their work. And indeed the interlinking of our separate causes. As Maroof said, there is an intersectional approach to actually approaching oppressions and tackling them. So we're in Black History Month currently. Anti-Black racism is something that needs to be addressed. We're heading into Islamophobia Awareness Month. Islamophobia, a form of anti-Muslim racism that needs to be addressed. There is an interlinking, and there's an intersection between the two. Both issues can affect people, Black Muslim individuals, for example. These are all causes that need to be interlinked. These are all causes that need to then be championed together moving forth. If indeed you want to get in touch with us, you want to further the work of the Green Party, specifically in relation to the embedding of the APPG definition of Islamophobia, or indeed raising awareness around Islamophobia and tackling Islamophobia, get in touch with us at the Muslim Council of Britain. You can email us at publicaffairs@mcb.org.uk, and we're on all of the socials. So reach out, let's have this conversation, let's have these conversations, continuing having them and addressing Islamophobia across civil society going forth. I do believe we're going to open up to Q&A, which Miqdad has very kindly volunteered to moderate. So let's just head there. Miqdad, over to you.
Thank you very much. I've been trying to answer questions as we've gone along in terms of by answering by typing them both in the chat box and in the Q&A, but some of them are still here, so I'm going to try and answer all of them that are on this screen. So we've got, there is no phobia in Islamophobia. Just regret that there are still people who somehow believe in belief instead of facts and science. I'm not sure what this means, but in obviously there are beliefs that many people have, and the key point that we want to get across is it doesn't matter whether you believe in religion or you don't believe in religion. All of us will probably be united in saying that just because someone happens to have a belief or a view shouldn't mean that they're treated differently in terms of their structural discrimination. They shouldn't find it harder to get a job. They shouldn't find it harder to get a flat. They shouldn't pay more for insurance. They shouldn't face verbal or physical abuse on the streets. They shouldn't, as a group, be considered to be a group that's taking over the country, be treated differently and as a pariah. That's what we agree on, and that's what Islamophobia is. And therefore, that's the key point when we talk about adopting any definition. That's what we need to do. So hopefully that answers that question. Okay. Bernard Egbury from the Manchester Green Party, when adopting the definition of Islamophobia, what precisely is to be adopted? Is it solely a one paragraph or a whole document? No, it's very simple. I mean, I think what's really important, what those who have come up with this definition believe to be very important is that the one-line definition that Islamophobia is racism, and it's a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. That as a line is the definition. And whilst there are examples that the APPG definition has, and that would be something that we think is important as a way for people to understand that definition, that's not the be-all and end-all for us. We believe very strongly that when you align and understand Islamophobia as a type of racism, that really is how Muslims and Muslim identity, whether it's mosques, cemeteries, the way people dress, Muslim names, when those are the things the racism targets, that is understood, then all the examples are the same examples that we're already aware of when it comes to anti-Black racism. I mean, of course, there are certain things that are important. You know, there are these conspiracy theories that are specifically about Muslims that it's worth being aware of. And therefore, you know, having explanatory notes are always valuable and useful and helpful. But it's up to you, you know, as groups, as individuals, to really find a way to deal with that. And I'm happy, you know, I'd be happy if the definition itself would be adopted. But I think that these examples help people understand it, and therefore it's useful. And I think the party should consider that as well. Okay, let's go to Chrissy Brown. Is Islamophobia as a term something the Green Party should continue using? So I did answer this in the chat, but I think it's worth reiterating it here. Look, it's not really up to many, you know, anyone here or any, you know, all of us in society to choose a term. I think really it's the victims of racism who should define the racism that they face. I mean, that should be quite straightforward. I mean, you know, many people might say, oh, anti-Semitism isn't the right term for the racism that Jewish people face and Jews face. And they would argue, oh my God, don't you realize that Semites include Arabs? And therefore, if you're anti-Semitic and you actually love Arabs but hate Jews, that means you're not actually anti-Semitic because you love Arabs. I mean, it's nonsense. These are semantic arguments that are actually not true and not relevant, because we live in a society where anti-Semitism is understood, and rightly so, as a specific type of racism that targets Jews. And therefore, you know, it's not up to us and those who don't like that term to really be fighting against it. What we should try and do is listen very clearly, listen to the victims of the racism, and that's the term that Muslim communities have agreed and really talked about, and have covered and used this term for the last few decades. And it's important that therefore that is now the term that we need to go forward. What we don't want to have to go down a route of is now going down a route of choosing another definition, a term, and then having another definition, and then going through. Look, we are in a situation where Islamophobia is so rampant. Let us just agree with the definition that we already have, and let's focus on trying to tackle it. And the point is, we're still on that first stage. So I would say I don't think we should be talking about whether we like this term or not. This is a term that Muslim communities have chosen. Let's take that, and now let's try and see how we can tackle it. Okay. Paul Susik has got a definition. A question here about. We have a climate emergency that threatens to end human civilization on this planet, and here we are talking about which imagined God we should or should not tolerate or offend. I think perhaps, unless we've been in a different conversation, that's not really what we've been talking about at all. I don't think at any stage in the entirety of the presentation, when we talked about manifestations of Islamophobia, anything was about offending what God we believe in or not. As it's been very clear, you can discriminate against someone very clearly based on what they, the reality. If you look at all the structural discrimination we talked about, if you're a Muslim, you find it's harder to get a job. If you're a Muslim, it's harder to buy insurance. You pay more for it. If you're a Muslim, if you've got a Muslim name, you're harder to get a flat. If you're a Muslim, you get discriminated at school. If you're a Muslim, people think you're trying to take over the country. These aren't issues of tolerance or offense. These are issues of structural racism. And I don't think that we should be ignoring structural racism in our society. In fact, I believe all progressive forces, all progressive groups need to fully adopt and almost embrace anti-racism as an unambiguous issue that needs to be agreed on by all. So I think that this line of argument I don't think has any validity. So that was Paul Susik's question that came out. The next one is, what action can we take against the press for inciting this type of hatred? They seem to publish lies and incitement with impunity. It's so dangerous and increases in hate crime that's clearly linked. That's a really good question, Alec. Thank you for asking it. I think that, okay, firstly, it's worth recognizing, we live in a free society. Free speech is a vital part of the society that we live in. And it's really important that people have the right and ability to speak openly and have their views heard. And the problem we have is that when you have a publisher, and that publisher, whether it is a newspaper publisher or whether it is a broadcaster, they can and should have regulation. And there is regulation. So when it comes to broadcast media, for example, it's very, very, very clear that they have very strong regulation. And when it comes to print media, the regulation is far at a much lower level. And to be honest, in some respect, it's much, much lower. And it should be low. But none of that justifies the racism that sort of is pervaded and the hate that's developed. And let me just give you a couple of facts, which I think are really important. When it looks at the academic evidence, Cambridge University and others have made it very clear that the way that Muslims are talked about in the press and by political leaders has led to, and what Cambridge University has called, an atmosphere of hostility against Muslims. So what you see is all of these terms being used: Islamic terrorist, Allahu Akbar, when it's used in that negative way in these types of conversations. When you have, cut out and keep guide as to what terrorists look like, what you see is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, a big proportion of all articles that mention Muslims or Islam or something like that are related to terrorism. And that's obviously, I think it's close to between a third and a half of all articles that mention Muslims are related to terrorism. I mean, this is outrageous. It is outrageous that that's the case. Obviously, Muslims aren't, a third or half of Muslim, when people hear about Muslims shouldn't be about terrorism, because that's not who Muslims are. It is very, very bad, because it's a bad reflection of the reality. And what we want in press is to inform people. So what should happen? Well, obviously, as the Muslim Council of Britain Centre for Media Monitoring does, we try and talk. We try and constructively engage with media. So in our last session, just last week, we had two sessions, one with the managing editors and editors, the top people in all of the main newspaper and media outlets, and we had this conversation of, how can we engage better, what can we do, how can we improve the way that imagery is used badly against Muslims, etc. We had another session which was about how Muslims are misrepresented when it comes to terrorism. We had the top security correspondents all talking about all of this, and so the key point here is there is an understanding of this issue, and we need to try and ensure the media themselves get it. I think it's just about talking to media, trying to improve, because regulation, unfortunately, is very difficult to get in place, and I think we're going to really struggle to get much more than that. Okay, how many? I think there have been lots of different questions, and let's see. Jonathan Bartley, to what extent do you believe the government's hostile environment has fueled Islamophobia within the UK? Thank you for that question, Jonathan. I think that has played a role. I think that the hostile environment often has come from a place of prejudice and racism, that others are different and therefore should be treated in a hostile way. And I understand that side of things. That's definitely one part of the argument. I think a big part of the reality is that some of these individuals really think that Muslims are a threat, and Islam is a threat, that our Western liberal democracy is a threat from these puny Muslims. And I think that as a result, they have tried to manifest that in different ways, and that discrimination and prejudice that seems to be really targeting Muslims in this way is really a challenge that's happened. I think hostile environment is one manifestation of that challenge, but I think it's only one out of many. I think you see the way that the Muslims are treated in the media, you see the way that Muslims are treated on the street, and all the stats that are there on this. So I think it's far broader than that. I think the hostile environment is one part of the sort of them and us mentality, and Muslims are caught up very much in this. I think that there was also a question in the chat, which wasn't in the Q&A, but in the chat by Neil Jameson, talking very much about the importance about not spending a lifetime about the definition, but about how we should talk about, Muslim communities should be talking quite and engaging with the environment. I think that's spot on. I think Neil's right. The APG definition is fine. We just need to agree it, adopt it, and move on to tackling Islamophobia, tackling the challenges that we face, including the climate emergency, which is a vital thing. And Muslim communities are very much part of it and need to be a bigger part of this challenge that we face. Other questions that we have. Jane, thank you for that point. I agree with everything you said here. We cannot address climate emergency when all people aren't treated equally. We're a political party that supports social justice, and going forwards, we need to know that there are going to be more refugees, many of whom are likely to be Muslim, and we need to take a stance that racism is not acceptable. I think I agree with that fully. So thank you, Jane, for highlighting that. I think maybe maybe it's worth asking Maroof. There's a couple of questions here about the party not adopting the definition. So maybe I should ask you, Maroof, to deal with that.
Hello, yeah. I'm not sure why the party's not adopted it. It's something that we in the Greens of Colour we're encouraging very, very strongly, actually, very vociferously. We're encouraging the party to adopt this definition of Islamophobia, and we're looking to bring it to. We're looking to actually get a motion passed at the Spring Conference in 2021. Members, allies, supporters, if anyone is interested in getting involved, I would highly encourage you to contact us on the Greens of Colour at greenparty.org.uk. I'll put the email address over in the chat for those that do want to help us get this motion passed at Spring Conference 2021. But I am, as a Muslim member of the party, I am quite concerned actually that we as a party haven't adopted the definition. I think it's quite disgraceful. We've adopted many other definitions, but we won't adopt the definition of Islamophobia. Maybe a question to our leaders. We've got Jonathan on at the moment, and it's something that I'll be putting to Jonathan quite soon, actually. and say, why haven't you? But yes, we would definitely like to get it passed as soon as possible. Thank you.
Okay, there's a couple of questions at the end here. Let's see. What, if any, evidence?
Sorry, Mick, we have Jonathan Bartley on the chat.
Oh, sorry.
He'd
Yes.
very much like to respond to that question.
Can you give him?
Yeah, very much. Let me just. There we go. There we are. Just promoting to panelists, and we'll have Jonathan join us shortly. I'm acutely aware of the time, and it is 2 o'clock. Time flies when you're having fun, I guess. It's been a fantastic discussion. Jonathan, thank you for joining us as a panelist. Response to Maroof from Greens of Colour.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, Green Party is wonderfully democratic, but also frustratingly democratic. And did come to the last conference, and it was referred back, and I voted against that. The leadership have been full square behind adopting it. On my local council, I voted for it. Sian has backed it on the London Assembly. We've done absolutely everything we can. The frustration has been with the conference procedures and processes. So it is not, because we're a Democratic Party, the leadership can't say the party must adopt this and it's so. Conference has to do it collectively, and we have to collectively do it as a party. So we've done all we can to bring it to conference, but it's conference that hasn't adopted it yet, and that is the issue. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for it to hopefully come to spring conference and be adopted, councillors can put forward motions in their local councils and get their local councils to adopt it. Local parties can pass motions and adopt it at the local level in their parties. I mean, I hope your party has, Maroof. I hope you proposed it in your local party and you've adopted it. Certainly, we've been doing that and encouraging councillors right around the country and local bodies to do it. So it is about process, and we've also got a holistic review going on. We've debated that and trying to fast track that, which will make our decision making much more rapid in the future, so we don't have to wait for another conference in order to get these motions through if they don't come through, and we hope that they will.
Thank you, Jonathan. Just while you're on, it's great to actually great to have you on. There's a question on the Q&A at the moment from Anne Gray, and the question is how would the new definition being proposed deal with 2 examples of experience within the Green Party, and they are halal meat being denounced as against animal rights, and the second one is a white convert age 66 being told on coming out in Green Party circle as Muslim. I wouldn't have thought of an intelligent girl like you, so there's members of the party that wouldn't want others to be Muslims. So, I mean, Anne's proposed questions there. Would you be able to answer them at all?
Yeah, I mean, we have a complaints procedure, and hopefully complaints are brought in circumstances where they feel that there has been Islamophobic statements, and they will be dealt with by the appropriate processes. And those processes are independent of the leadership and of the executive deliberately, so that they are impartial and they're able to address them in the most appropriate way. And so we have those processes in place to deal with them, but there should be no acceptance of Islamophobia within the Green Party, absolutely. On the specific issue of halal meat, you'll know that the question, because we've had discussions about this, Maroof, the question was put to me specifically about halal meat. I was very interested about the context point that you made, Tabitha, that I was asked about halal meat. That was the context. And my mistake was not to widen it out and say, as a vegan, I don't believe that any animal should be killed. That's my personal conviction. And I didn't spot that it is an Islamophobic trope, and I should have. And that was my huge mistake. And I have done awareness. I've written to the Muslim Council. I've apologized to the Muslim Council. And I've apologized publicly for it. I'm very happy to do so again here. And I hope that by my mistake, it will be a wake-up call to all of us to be better informed, better aware, spot these Islamophobic loaded questions, and so we won't fall into those traps in the future.
Excellent. I do believe we have hit our 1 hour mark. It's been a fantastic fringe. Thank you everyone for joining us. The discussion has certainly begun, and I can see from the flurry of activity in the chat that the wheels are already turning and people are having necessary discussions vis-a-vis next steps. Let's very much keep that going. Again, if you would like our assistance in helping draft motions or providing motions or previous motions that have already passed at council level, we're very much happy to do that and work alongside the Green Movement in order to make that happen in terms of embedding the definition of Islamophobia at a council level. You can get in touch with us, publicaffairs@mcb.org.uk. I'll pop that in the chat as well, if indeed you want to work as a councillor with us. We're very much open to doing that, and hopefully engaging the Green Party going forth as well, to see the definition adopted and work alongside one another to address Islamophobia within wider society. Thank you so much everyone for joining us today. Have an excellent Saturday and an excellent conference. I know that there's still some stuff ongoing, and hopefully this is the beginning of a rather productive exchange hereafter.
And on behalf of the Green Party, can I say thank you so much for doing this session and for taking the time. Really do appreciate it. Thank you.
A pleasure. Thanks everyone for
myself as well, as part of the Greens of Colour. I think it's very important that we've had this discussion. It's very important, you know, we had quite a lot of participants and everyone's getting involved in the chat. As I've said previously, it's important that these discussions are had, and it's important that people actually ask questions, because if we don't ask questions, we're not going to learn much. So thank you, Jonathan, for joining us. Thank you, Miqdad and Tabitha, for organising this. And if you do have any further questions on this, especially from the Greens of Colour, I've put the email address in the chat, but I'll just repeat it again. It's greensofcolour@greenparty.org.uk, and we would 100% like to get the definition of Islamophobia embedded within the Green Party as soon as possible. Thank you.